Hello, everyone. We are just starting to go live, and it is great to be with you. I've got folks coming in, and uh, it's great to be with you on the second episode of the People's Podcast here. And it's a special episode because it is on Earth Day, and we're really glad to be joined by Sadie Blancafleur. And she is the co-chair of the Power Shift Network. She also works with Fossil Free Stanford and Divest Ed, and is an undergraduate studying anthropology at Stanford. And we're happy to say, too, as the People's Party, the Power Shift Network is one of our allies and great partners in the climate struggle. And so, Sadie, it's great to have you with us. I was at the action, actually, as I mentioned a little bit before we started the show, that Power Shift hosted in DC. It was a really great action. We went to the State Department and demanded that that the Biden administration really listen to families in Texas who are struggling, who are dealing with, the products and the pollution of all of the oil that is shipped from all of these pipelines that come in through Canada, ship all these really dirty tar sands, and they end up going funneling down into the South and going to Texas. And so, and then after that, there was this amazing installation too on the National Mall. We marched to the National Mall. There was an art installation of an oil rig and also a gigantic windmill that had been built by activists there as well. And so it was really great to participate in that, and also to have you on, because I know that Power Shift has been one of the groups that has really been leading the way as a network of different climate organizations, particularly youth-led climate organizations, and climate justice organizations. And so, Sadie, it would be amazing if you could tell us about the work that you've been doing at the Power Shift Network and some of the history of the group and how you approach the climate struggle.
Great. Thank you so much, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here today. I currently serve as board co-chair, so all of the credit to planning the convergence, really has to go to our incredibly dedicated staff who've been working tirelessly on it for the past couple of years. We really came into Power Shift 21 with the intention of, planning this during the first 100 days of the Biden administration. So it's really exciting to see it come to light, especially as Biden is pushing forward all this really is taking climate change as such a central focus of this administration's priorities. So just to zoom out a little bit, Power Shift Network was originally founded in 2004. It was known as Energy Action Coalition. And we have this really long history of convergences starting in 2007, also bringing folks together right before the 2008 elections. And again in 2009, and again in 2011, and our most recent one is this year, but before that, in 2016, during the 2016 presidential elections. So as an organization, we're really dedicated to supporting our 98 plus network members. And, that includes like other nonprofit organizations and student groups. And we have this real focus on supporting a youth-led climate movement. As a young person myself, we are the ones who are going to bear the disproportionate impact of the climate crisis. And, we should be the ones leading the way in terms of the sort of policies that we're seeing. So it's been an absolute honor to be able to serve on the board and support in this capacity.
Sadie, can I jump in on that and ask you, because something that you just said is so true, which is the youth are the ones who are going to not only have to clean up after all the mess that generations before have made, but they're also going to have to deal with displacement, with health issues, all of these things that are related to our climate. And you already see, for millennials like myself, it's almost impossible to even own a home. So we're already going through that struggle. We're drowning in student debt. And now you've got Gen Z and these younger generations that are coming along and looking at this entire mess and going, what the hell, dude? Like, what happened? How could you do this to us, your children, your grandchildren? And so one thing that I really wanted to ask you about is, can you dive in a little bit and tell us about the disproportionate harm that our inaction and inability to move with speed on climate change is going to have, not only on our youth, but on our already marginalized communities?
Yeah, I moved to California for college, and we're already seeing the disproportionate impact in terms of forced migration, in terms of the wildfires. This is a huge fear that folks have, and it's especially come to light. The disproportionate impact on already marginalized communities when you're forced to relocate, but there's no place to relocate to if you don't have the funds. And you don't have the resources or the means or the social networks. And yeah, this is just like one example, and it's reflective of the broader way in climate change is disproportionately impacting all aspects of our society. And that's something that Power Shift is really focused on. Climate change is an intersectional issue, and in order to truly address the climate crisis, we need to address every single aspect of injustice in our society, whether that's economic, racial, social, political.
Yeah, and can you speak a little bit to what our youth is looking at if we don't take the urgent steps that we need to take to resolve these problems?
Right.
What kind of future are they looking at if we don't do what we need to do to fix this?
We're looking at a future of intense instability. Just in conversations with friends who are my age or even younger, they've already made the commitment to not have kids because they are so scared.
Ow.
And this is like 17, 18-year-olds that I've been having these conversations with, and they're telling me, yeah, I would otherwise want kids, but I am so scared about what the future holds that, I can't envision myself starting a family. And yeah, it's hard to envision what the future is going to look like in the face of again, so much instability.
As someone who has done a lot of volunteering in the climate community, worked with Extinction Rebellion, for example, done a number of direct actions. We shut down Washington, D.C. by blocking all traffic into Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago. Something I was really proud of because, something that I believe in strongly and something that's motivated my work here. And I had friends too that do that exactly like you described, Katie. Sadie, sorry. They had said that they didn't want to have kids because of the climate crisis, And it's also something that I've struggled with myself right now. I don't have kids right now, but I've thought that I might want to. But it's kind of like a morally difficult decision to do that with the kind of world that we're facing, and knowing that so many of our leaders and the political parties that we have right now are not taking that seriously. And so, I wanted to ask you too about what do you think that, how do you think, do you think that the two parties right now that we have, that they're taking this crisis seriously enough? Do you think that they're taking the actions that they need to? You had Joe Biden, who's supposed to be with the Democrats and the left party in this country. You had his party. He campaigned specifically on not ending fracking, not banning fracking. They put at the last minute the membership of the party or delegates had actually approved not accepting fossil fuel money to DNC, and they reversed that decision. They took it back so the DNC can continue taking fossil fuel money. And so, as someone who's been in this struggle since I would say since maybe the mid 2000s, that decade, and worked on the 2009 climate bill at Environment America at that time, a nonprofit in Washington, D.C., I've seen the way that time and time again, just like the Democrats and the Republicans have had full knowledge of this crisis, and yet they only exacerbated it. They haven't treated it with the urgency that it deserves. And so I wonder what you would say to that and what you think about that.
And this is specifically in response, this idea of the two parties knowing about the climate crisis, for decades and only making it worse. and especially in the context of, Biden's new climate plan. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting, right? Because as a movement, we focus so much on, Democrats and moving the Democrats forward. However, I think there's like a false equivalency here, in terms of, comparing, the political parties, because, it is Joe Biden and it wasn't Trump who is advancing, like climate action. And although it might not be, the exact level of climate action that we need, it is, a step in the right direction. And, it was really exciting to see Biden, sign on to the Paris Climate Accord, coming into office. And, this morning, I think I read an article, Biden's committed America to cut greenhouse gas emissions to 50%, to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030, which is super exciting. Again, it's not where we need to be, especially given that we are on track to, exceed 2 degrees of warming. It really puts into,
which is catastrophic level.
Right? Catastrophic level. And sort of brings us back to that, like, what will the future look like? The Biden climate plan right now is not nearly ambitious enough, but, considering the lack of action over, ever since we've known about the climate crisis, it is a step in the right direction. And it's really heartening to see the political atmosphere in Congress, be more open to talking about climate and really centering climate as a part of this, administration.
Yeah, Sadie, and I think a part of that too is because there's a level of pressure, I think, now that everything that's happened, especially over the last year, and first of all, Greta coming out, she became like, the face of the young climate movement, and it's something that brought a lot of renewed attention. And then you've got the Sunrise Movement, you've got you guys, and so there's so much youth that is. And it's funny because people like to say, oh, the youth don't care about things like that. They just want to be on their social media and do this and do that. That is so not true. Youth today is like a gazillion times smarter than I was when I was their age. They have so much knowledge and so much introspect, and they're able to really look at the situation and go, wait, something's really wrong here. You know what I mean? And I think that if you combine that with the pandemic, and the fact that we're seeing that in other countries, people have guaranteed health care, that they have a guaranteed education, that, they're not going bankrupt like 500,000 people do here every year just because they, needed health care. And a lot of those people even have health insurance. So I think that there is this societal awakening happening, and a lot of it is youth-led, to kind of wake us up to the fact that there's so much more that we could be doing. And so I wanted to ask you, because while it is a step in the right direction, it's definitely not enough. So what would enough look like? What do you guys feel like, okay, this is a good, first step, but we need to be more urgent, more aggressive. So what do you guys feel would be the actions that our government could take to really kick this into high gear and get us where we need to be?
Yeah, I think you've made a lot of really great points. I wouldn't necessarily say that the youth are smarter, but we're definitely like a lot more motivated because we're looking down at the apocalypse.
I'll say that the youth are smarter.
Dude, I'm telling you, sometimes I talk to people and I'm like, oh, Jackson Hinkle, I went on his show. I'm all talking about some dude who's like 21 and he's like, I'm 22. And I'm like, oh my God. At 22, I was not like, trust me, you guys are smarter. Just take my word on this. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. In order to like, if we're going to really address climate change, it's going to fundamentally mean rethinking the way in which our society operates. We have this, and I think the pandemic has really brought into perspective. Thank you so much for bringing up the pandemic that we're all living through. it's really put into perspective that the sort of changes that we do need to make aren't as crazy as we've once thought. That, you know, there is a situation in which, you know, people don't have to commute 2+ hours to get to work and, you know, rely so much on fossil fuel powered cars, you know, that they can go remote and, you know, live with their family and, you know, do everything that they want to do in the context of work. And that's been something that has been really interesting to see as the pandemic has played out, that the sort of drastic changes that we need to address climate change, the fundamental rethinking of the way that our society operates, it's possible. And, you know, it's what we're going to need to do if we're going to achieve justice across all different intersections.
Right, because, you know, just to make things less abstract, I mean, some of the predictions are that we will have hundreds of millions of climate refugees by the 2050s if we don't act on this, if we don't avoid that kind of catastrophic level warming. That major cities that exist right now will be underwater. We already see just, I mean, things that are like, you know, apocalyptic signs. I mean, cities where the skies turn red because the fires are so bad. And today, or a few days ago, I saw that in California, the amount of kind of moisture, the moisture levels in the forests are at a record low, which portends an even worse fire season than we've seen before. And obviously, this was during the pandemic last year that we saw, you know, cities, their skies turning red, yellow. And so that we could see something even worse now. And in addition to that, we have incredible superstorms, the desertification of lands, which threatens our food system, you know. And so this is truly existential. If you have mass desertification of land in a way that, you know, we can't keep up, then that is potentially a just catastrophic scenario as well, with the inability, you know, to feed hundreds of millions or even billions of people. And this can happen quickly as a result of feedback loops, which, you know, we don't know when we're triggering these different feedback loops, whether it's the release of methane in the ocean or whether the release of methane in Siberia. In Canada, we already see that there's evidence of mass release of methane already occurring, where it's dotting the landscape, because you see what used to be permafrost actually collapsing in on itself with the release of what was frozen methane. And methane can retain many more times a stronger heat trapping effect than carbon dioxide does. And so we're triggering all of these different feedback loops. The Amazon, of course, is being burned and is being logged to the point that it has now become less of a carbon sink, and it is now a net carbon producer. It is releasing more carbon than it was taking in. And so that the Amazon, of course, has been compared to the lungs of the world, you know, in that it was recycling so much carbon dioxide, and now it's no longer doing that. We have the oceans acidifying because there's so much carbon dioxide being absorbed by the oceans. And so, you know, this is why, to me, it's like, if a comet was going to hit Earth in the next, you know, 2 decades, like, it doesn't matter if we go 10% of the way, you know, to diverting that comet, you know, like, that's still a horrific apocalyptic scenario when that happens. And so that's part of why, you know, I think that, look, we have to drastically change, I mean, what our governments do. And with each year, you know, I'm 31. With it, I've you know, been hearing scientists and the political parties, you know, talk about this for decades now, and just the, you know, the same warnings all the time, and it just becomes more and more dire because we continue losing time. And then, of course, we've had this warning from the IPCC in the last couple of years about, you know, that we have 12 years left, down to, you know, 10 or 9 now, and that's only to, you know, for kind of like a significant chance, you know, if we manage to get off of fossil fuels by then, a significant chance to avoid catastrophic warming. So even those kinds of like 2030 plans are not necessarily, good enough or guarantee that we could avoid those worst 2 degrees Celsius warning scenarios. And so, the level of the change is just like on a scale, because we've waited so long, that people have compared it to like a World War II type mobilization, and our government, we've seen that our government can mobilize quickly when it needs to, even for the pandemic. We mobilized trillions of dollars to Wall Street within 2 weeks of the lockdowns, so look at how that can happen when the rich need it, when, the stock market, when it comes down to the stock market, but when it comes to the planet, when it comes to the climate justice, when it comes to things that actually affect working people, like that's when we see this kind of like system shutdown, and it's incapable of doing it when it goes against corporate interests. And so I wanted to ask you about something related to this, because something that really inspires me that you've been working on is an effort to divest Stanford. And I know that there's been like divest efforts that have been sweeping the country at different universities. And I wanted to ask how you've been going about that and how it's going, and why you want to do it. Why do you think, like, what is Stanford doing right now that it shouldn't be?
Yeah, thank you for sort of outlining all of the different climate science and talking about displacement in particular. Just wanted to touch on that really briefly before, launching into your question around divestment. My family like lives in Alaska now, and like living in California as well. Just, the issues that we're seeing are happening right now as a result of the climate crisis. And it's insane to me that we're not mobilizing the sort of money needed into the communities that have been displaced as a result of melting permafrost or as a result of wildfires. And I, again, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of my friends who live in California, whose houses are no longer insured because insurance companies won't cover them, are incredibly scared about this upcoming wildfire season. And where will they go when they're forced to move? In terms of fossil fuel divestment, I have been involved in Fossil Free Stanford, and we've been pushing Stanford to divest from the top 100 fossil fuel companies. We had like this proposal going on last year when we were all on campus, but unfortunately, the administration decided, they felt it was more political, and it was more of a political statement, even though, when you're looking at investments in fossil fuel companies, the UC Berkeley, the University of California system divested specifically because, there is this economic component to investing in fossil fuels. We know that with the current amount of reserves that oil companies have right now, if we were to burn all of that, we'd be hitting 6 to 7 degrees of warming, if not more. So it's not possible for us to burn all of the reserves that they have right now. But they want to, because that's, those are their assets. That's how they're going to make their money. And that's really horrific. So I've been involved in Fossil Free Stanford, something that I'm really engaged in right now, especially in light of all of the impacts on the climate impacts that we're seeing today, again, in Alaska and California, across the country, is reinvestment. So I currently serve as the reinvestment chair for the College Climate Coalition. And we just put out, this enormous toolkit that we've been creating over the past, 2 years now. And we were able to release it this past January. And reach hundreds of thousands of people through it, which has been incredible, and really outline the different ways in which we need to move institutional money, not just from these really awful corporations that are actively destroying our planet, but into the communities that need it most. And so often we think about, this punitive punishment for corporations, and we also need to be thinking about the communities most impacted and how we're going to support them moving forward, because it's very likely that we're going to hit beyond 2 degrees of warming.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to ask you about, Sadie, was, so I actually just had Shervin Asami on my show today to interview him, and he's a progressive who's running for Congress in California's 30th district. And his family's from Iran. And one of the things that we were talking about, because I was born in Cuba, one of the things that we were talking about is the atrocious foreign policy of the United States. And I think for this conversation, something I wanted to touch on was, so when we start a war, it's usually one of two things. It's either a regime change war, or it's a war to get resources and exploit that country of its resources, including oil, right? So I think that one of the most damaging things to the climate movement is these wars that we continue to wage, trying to get, petroleum from these countries. We destabilize their area, and then we get pissed off when something bad happens there, and it's a twofer. It's twice as bad, because not only are we starting a war, but we're starting a war for oil, which we shouldn't be using anyway to begin with. So what is you guys' stance as far as wars?
And at least I want to say real quick that Donald Trump, remember when Donald Trump came in and he said, we're fighting these wars for oil, and the media kind of said, oh, you're not supposed to say that, that's like supposed to be like untold. But then it was so funny, because only like a few weeks ago Kamala Harris said, oh yeah, we fight wars for oil, we fought
and
wars
water's
for oil,
next,
and now we're going to fight wars for water. And so it's like, wow, now basically both parties are admitting that we do fight those wars for oil. So anyways, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. They used to, there's so many people that posted that video saying Kamala saying the quiet part out loud. Like, it's like they used to pretend that wasn't the reason, but now they're just straight up saying it and saying, hey, prepare for the water wars, which sounds fun by the title, but not really once it starts happening. So, yeah, Sadie, I mean, what do you guys think about these endless wars where we're just trying to get oil, which we should be weaning off of anyway?
I mean, it's horrific, it's not something that should be happening. It's totally unconscionable in the context of the climate crisis that we're facing to, continue to be drilling instead of, and to use drilling as a continued drilling as a crutch as we transition.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the scariest things is countries like Cuba and Iran are being sanctioned right now to the point where they can't even get food or medicine. And I just have such an issue with us continuously trying to go into these countries and take their natural resources. I almost feel like, wasn't it enough that we came to this country and stole everything here? Like, is that not enough? We need to also try to do it in Venezuela and Iran and Iraq, like everywhere in the Middle East. And so I just think that that's something that we really need to look into, because when we talk about climate change, and it was something that you touched on earlier, which I think is really important, it's even affecting people's choices of whether they have a family. I mean, we think of climate as just, oh, it's going to be hot or cold over time, but it's not just that. It is displacement of people. It is communities being destroyed. It is people going, I don't know if I can have a kid. Like, I don't want kids, right? I've decided for my life, and I've known for years that I don't want kids. But there are a lot of people who do, and they're now in a position where if I can't even afford to own a home, if I'm supposed to be paying 30% or less on my mortgage and it's half my income, so I have to rent. If I can't, if I can't afford basic things, like, for example, in this pandemic, I'm one of the people that's on unemployment. And supposedly there was an unemployment extension through September, and I have yet to receive it. You know what I'm saying? So there's all of these issues that are already making it extremely difficult for people to just survive day to day. And so when you have that constant, I think it's on purpose, actually. I think that they make us struggle on the daily on purpose so that we don't have time to stop and think about all of these crises that are happening that we must address, because we're so busy just, surviving today, that how can we get involved? How can we get engaged? So what would you say to people that are feeling so overwhelmed right now, but that they know that we have to do something? What can they do to help, even if they're just one person?
Yeah, just want to quickly note that you're 100% right, that there is this culture around work that is often forced to, like, it is just, the necessity of living in this country where we have to, make rent, where we have to, it's horrific. And in the context of how everyone's so burnt out and so tired, just trying to live, it's sometimes really hard to get folks to, actually show up for like another meeting at the end of the day at like 7 p.m. at night, and just want to acknowledge and hold that. I everyone turns this, but vote, and if you have the part of the reason why we've struggled so much to get like real climate policy passed is just the political nature of our country, and particularly these very slim margins in the Senate. So especially like mobilizing folks in West Virginia and Alaska and like places with really low populations, whose votes have like a bigger sway in terms of the Senate makeup, like really going out there and mobilizing your friends to vote, since so many of the communities there have been really disenfranchised. And if you do have capacity, again, it all comes back to capacity. You identify an issue in your community, and, even just the phone call to your, congressperson is really transformative. I grew up in Baltimore City, Maryland, so very far away from where I'm living now, in many senses of the word. And we were able to mobilize this really cool youth coalition to get environmental policy passed at the city level. And it all started out by, setting up a meeting with a council member about an issue that we saw around styrofoam in our Baltimore City public schools. And obviously I'm not doing plastic pollution stuff anymore. I'm working in the divestment space and really thinking about how do we shift our society in broader ways. But everything contributes.
And speaking about that, I like to end on kind of, something to fight for and something to strive for. And so, as the work that we're doing at the Movement for a People's Party and building a People's Party is we're building a major new party that is completely free of corporate money. We have registered in about 5 states now. We have more than 150,000 members. We're going to be running a congressional slate of about a dozen candidates in 2022. Every single one of them is going to be fighting for a strong Green New Deal, no holds barred, and off of fossil fuels, net zero by 2030, because that's what the crisis demands. It's like we have to listen to the scientists. And so I wanted to ask you, what does the change look like in your mind? What are the policies that we need to strive for, whether it's things in the Green New Deal? What kinds of changes are you fighting for at Power Shift Network and you yourself?
On Power Shift Network's part, like we're, fighting for this intersection, like we're building this really intersectional youth-driven climate movement, and any policy that is going to address climate change is going to have to take into account, again, these very intersectional issues, and especially the disproportionate impact of like environmental pollution on communities of color, but also more broadly climate change. And in terms of obviously, like, we need massive mitigation efforts. We need massive shifts in terms of where we source our power and where we go from here in terms of like continuing to build infrastructure and but it's also going to take this adaptation component. And I think this has been raised in the chat there. We are set to pass 2 degrees of warming, and currently we also need to be thinking about adaptation efforts and how are we going to support folks both as we mitigate and move away from fossil fuels, but also support the folks that are already being impacted and will continue to be disproportionately impacted.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Eynelys, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to ask to close us out, or say.
You guys can go to peoplesparty.org and get a shirt. And and Sadie, I just want to tell you, people, your generation seriously gives me hope, because it's a struggle. It's a struggle. For me as an immigrant, the first year I was able to vote was 2016, and I felt so privileged to be able to do that. And when you're trying to fight to build something better, it can be really hard and discouraging to bump up against wall after wall after wall, and everything is no, and we always have money for war, but we never have money for our people or to take care of our climate. And it can wear on you. So I got to tell you, to see you guys coming together, bringing all of these organizations together, bringing all of these voices together, and standing up and saying, we don't care how things were before or what you guys are comfortable with. What we care about is the future, and how we ensure that that future is livable and fair and just for everybody. And the energy and the passion behind the youth today is what gives me hope for the future, because I see the fire, I see the fight, and I see that they are going to carry this to the end. There's no more excuses. They're standing up and they're saying, how dare you? We deserve a future where we can live and be comfortable and, not have people suffering left and right. And so I think what you guys are doing is amazing. I think it is admirable. I hope that you continue to coalesce. I hope that you continue to bring organizations together, and anything that we can do at the People's Party to help support that effort, we are more than happy to. It's amazing to have you on. We're happy to have you on anytime. Keep us up to date on what you guys are doing, because we want to support your actions. We want to support the things that you guys do, and just don't stop. Whatever you do not stop.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for letting me talk about PowerShift Convergence and all of the amazing work that our network organizations are doing and building, and will continue to build. And I'd encourage everyone, if they haven't had the chance yet, the convergence is still happening. You can still register for events, and we look forward to seeing you guys there.
And tell people where to find you guys online. Tell people where to find you guys online.
Sure. You can go to powershift.org, or for the PowerShift Convergence website, I believe it's powershift2021.org.
All right, everyone, check out powershift.org and the Convergence, which is still going on. And Sadie, it's been great speaking with you, and great to get some hope. Like Eynelys, I'm just completely inspired by the energy, that young people have nowadays. And so everyone check out powershift.org. And this has been the second episode of the People's Podcast. And you can find us on YouTube at YouTube/People's Party, and at peoplesparty.org. And so everyone have a good day, and happy Earth Day. The struggle continues.